This episode is brought to you by the Disney Plus Hulu Max bundle with plans starting at just $16.99 a month. Stream the latest seasons of The Last of Us on Max, Andor on Disney Plus, and the final season of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu. All of these and more streaming soon. Terms apply. Visit Disney Plus Hulu Max Bundle.com for more details.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is the Long Island Report. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. Welcome back. With me is my esteemed colleague, co-host, my good friend, Jesse Garcia. Jesse is the vice chair of the state Republican Party, as well as being the county chair of the Suffolk Republican Party. So, Jesse, another week, more important stuff is happening. Something that's bothered me enormously, and I want to discuss it with you, is the Biden Labor Department has just come out with these rules that would allow fiduciaries in pension funds, mutual funds, deferred compensation funds, IRAs, Keogh plans to invest in risky ventures. For example, all these environmental and sustainability and governance stuff, the left-wing New Deal programs for, no fossil fuels. Everything has to be electric in the next 10 minutes, relying on solar and wind. You remember Solyndra, Jesse?
Yes, I do.
And we remember what happened to Solyndra. Biden went there, put on a big show, and then it went bankrupt. It was a total failure. So what this rule would do would say, if you're a fiduciary, a trustee for money, an executor, and you invested in these fly-by-night ridiculous things, as you correctly pointed on before we started going on the show, if you want to put your money in these ridiculous cryptocurrencies have no real value and you don't know how to get it regulated, where to go for your money, if you want to invest everything in that and you lost, the pensioners or the beneficiaries of the funds would lose money unless the government bailed them out. I mean, does this sound like a good idea to you?
It doesn't sound like a good idea to me anywhere. I don't like when the government forces different specific agendas on the financial markets. I mean, they're basically telling, all of their businesses and then this, to invest in certain companies that they deem good because it's politically and agenda driven for them, as opposed to what's best for the fund that they're protecting. How about the New York State retirement system? How about other systems throughout the area? 401ks. These people should be allowed to invest their money where they deem it's going to be successful and grow their retirements and other establishments. We don't need government to be in not only the pockets of businesses and such, but now telling you what's a good business and what's a bad business because of their political affiliation. It's wrong, especially when we just talked about FTX. It's a cryptocurrency. That thing went belly up and is now in bankruptcy. There's a scandal right there with $36 million being donated to Democrats throughout this country, and for the purposes of protecting their industry and their interests. Should we have allowed people to invest in that company and take and such, and that should be one of the people that we should utilize in our investments? It would have hurt our retirements if that's the case. It's a bad policy, but it's nothing new from this president or this White House.
There really is a deep state. There really is an administrative state.
There really is. Absolutely.
And they're using the bureaucracies and the agencies to tell people how to live and what can be invested in. And if I'm the beneficiary of a pension and I don't want my money in there, I have nothing to say. And then when the trustees say, well, I'm covered, I can invest in anything I want because this is part of the factors I have to consider, whether it's good for ESG, and then they lose money, who do I go to get my pension back? Who's going to pay my rent? Who's going to pay my gas bill? Who's going to pay for my food?
Absolutely. And that's the problem that we have. And this is why we can't have Big Brother or, as you accurately described, the deep state. This is the bureaucratic machine that is embedded in our government, that's been there before this president, before the previous couple of presidents, and their attitude is, we were here before you, we're going to be here after you. But we can't give them the power and the authority. But that's the problem. The commander-in-chief of this country, the president of this country, is their part and parcel partner in making sure that he gets what he needs out of for political purposes, as opposed to what's good for the fund, what's good for retirement funds, what's good business sense.
And remember, they can do all this and make this effort to reformulate the development of the economy through a bureaucracy and not through the Congress. They don't even have to call a vote on it in Congress to have an open, real debate on this. They do through a rulemaking process, which nobody pays attention to. They force it through. They say it's the rule, and these guys are now covered. It's a very strange situation when you call yourselves a democracy, when you call yourselves a representative government, when you say that this is a free market economy, and all of a sudden, this is the worst kind of statism. This is like the 5-year plans that the communists and socialists have always had. Their agenda speaks to what has to happen, and nobody else can be heard on it.
And it's amazing. It's funny. Who are these individuals that we're saying that the Biden administration is saying this is a good investment, this is a bad investment? Like you said, we're going to ban all investments or activities by companies that deal with fossil fuels. Well, is that because those companies are not contributing to you? They're your political enemies. This is a way of again exacting political revenge and enacting a political agenda that's anti-American. I mean, how many times have we spoken on this radio show about the fact that only about 2 years ago, and by a stroke of a pen, we were no longer energy independent because of the Biden administration's actions to prevent drilling on federal lands and also ending the development of the Keystone Pipeline. That was a matter that ended our energy independence. And now what are we doing? We're encouraging Exxon to go, drill oil and get oil out of Venezuela.
Look, so you have this permanent government. It doesn't matter who controls the Congress, who controls the presidency. They have an agenda. They're there forever because they're protected by civil service. Maybe it's time to start thinking about whether civil service is carrying out the goals of good government as opposed to carrying out an ideological agenda of bad government and social and political and ideological planning by statists who live on long after the president is gone or individual members of the Senate is gone, and a change of the leadership and the House changes. It doesn't matter because they just stay there in perpetuity, protected by civil service, and they're not accountable to anybody, and you can't fire them.
But here's the issue, though. Listen, I believe in the system and such, and what you need are good managers. Think about it. This deep state is now enacting this type of political agenda on the financial community and investments for retirements based on the direction of their leader by a stroke of a pen, as you said, by issuing rules. That's the problem. There is a deep state here. And I do think that Donald Trump accurately shined a light on the deep state that's in our governments, whether it's local government and definitely the federal government, where he was combating the intelligence community on a regular basis, the war machine in the Pentagon at times, and of course, those professional diplomats and those the bureaucrats that are in our departments. But the thing is, once you have secretaries of departments, once you have managers that are going to enact policies that are more America-driven than they are anti-America-driven, if they're more free market-driven, how about that? Capitalistic and free market-driven, giving the ability of financial institutions to choose what is the best financial path for them. Whether they fail or not, it's up to them. It's their choice. But those are the type of managers we need. We can't just leave this onto the individual, worker bee that's in there. It's a direction they're getting from middle managers and the heads of the departments, and in this case, the commander-in-chief.
I think it's exactly right, and it's very troubling, and this has to be stopped. So let's switch gears. The newly elected governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul, just won by a few points. I think it was 300,000 votes that she beat Congressman Zeldin by, which was approximately 5% of the vote, in a state that has an overwhelming Democratic electorate. And Zeldin ran a very strong campaign, but he was fighting the entrenched Democratic machine, the Working Families Party, the Democratic Socialists, money coming from out of state. I mean, her coffers were just brimming with cash. I don't know. What did she beat Zeldin in terms of fundraising? 10, 15, 20 to 1, something like that, Jesse?
Something like that.
And now she has one of the most important positions to appoint, subject to the advice and consent of the state Senate, which, of course, is controlled by the Democrats. And that's the appointment of the chief judge of the state of New York. Now, Jesse, the chief judge of the state of New York is the leader of the court, runs the whole court system as the chief administrator for all the courts, as well as presides over the court as the leader of the body of that 7-person court. And we know, and we've talked about it with Ed Cox and John Faso, we know that what saved, in many instances, the congressional seats where the Republicans did very, very well as doing well in picking up some state Senate seats and the Assembly seats to try to avoid the tyranny of one-party leadership and governance by the Democrats, having a few more Republicans in there. What led that was a judiciary, even though all 7 members of the court, including Janet DeFiore, who's the chief judge, they were all Democrats, but they did the right thing. They voted 4-3, and they upheld the constitutional amendment that was passed by the voters, which was the rules of the game, when the Democrats tried to subvert that to pack the legislative process with partisan gerrymandering. And they had the guts to do it. And as a result of that, they went after DeFiore with all kinds of pretexts, and they forced her to resign. So now we get a new chief judge on the cusp. 7 names have been proposed by the Commission on Judicial Appointments. And Kathy Hochul has a very important, direct decision about the future of this state. Because if you don't have an honest court and you just have somebody to be a rubber stamp for the tyranny of the Democratic Party in the state legislature and the governorship, we have a real problem. So this choice is very important, and the progressives are pushing like hell to get their kind of person in so that this court is packed with progressives. What say you?
I think that, I remember speaking about this issue a couple of months ago where, Chief Judge Janet DeFiore, she restored the faith of the judiciary and the 3-party system in the United States, and specifically here in the state of New York. When she looked at something and ruled fairly, she restored the faith that people had in the courts by doing so, by doing what was right. And according to the law, she became a political target. She was, I'm using the word forced to be. She was allegedly forced to retire. All of a sudden, there was a smear campaign coming forward from her, and then she stepped down. And now we're moving forward with the appointment here. I'm not a lawyer. All I know is that, in the cases of the Second Appellate Division, I can say this because I'm not a lawyer, is that it's the worst court there is in the Appellate Division. It's most political. It's Democratic. It's where any fair election law goes to die, even if they're won, especially when they're won on the Supreme Court level in the 10th JD. But here now, I'm not too hopeful with Hochul's decision. We talked about her campaign contributions. We talked about her getting $300 million in campaign contributions, millions of dollars in campaign contributions, when she gave a contract to a COVID testing system that had never been done any business with the state of New York. And all of a sudden, they popped up with a contract. She popped up with a huge donation. She's the epitome. She comes from the Cuomo class, the Andrew Cuomo class of pay for play. So, all this is going to rest to see if she's going to attack and be a strong, rightful governor for all people with fairness, or is she going to be captured by the left because all she is a political animal that wants to move forward and advance her own political interests? I'm not hopeful with the governor's decision or how it's going to be. I believe it's going to be one that's going to be detrimental to all New Yorkers, no matter what your political persuasion is. Because at one point or another, once you have that court and it's sided or it's been politicized, it's politicized for everyone.
Absolutely correct. Kevin has given us that signal. We're going to take a break. This is the Long Island Report. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a few moments. Thank you.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistant's assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
Welcome back to the Long Island Report. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend, esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. So, Jesse, the numbers right now are there are 220 elected Republicans and 215 elected Democrats in the House of Representatives. The two races that have not been called yet, one House seat in Colorado, one House seat in California. You need 218, Jesse, to have a majority to elect a speaker. You can't have a speaker unless you have 218 votes in your favor. Kevin McCarthy has been selected by the caucus with about 35 votes against him, I think, from the so-called Freedom Caucus. And Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn has gotten a nod overwhelmingly from the Democrats. So the race in January, as of this moment, is going to be Jeffries versus McCarthy for who the next speaker is. Now, this is the problem, and this is an enormous problem. It's a political problem for McCarthy and for the governance of the House of Representatives. It's an agenda problem about what they do in terms of the scheduling, what's important to them. It's going to show a political and governmental problem going into the 2024 election. So let's talk about the 5 members of the House who've sworn up and down that they will not support and vote for McCarthy. So even if the 2 seats that have not been certified yet, have not been called yet for the Republicans or for the Democrats, let's say both of them go for the Republicans. Those 2 seats would have to vote for McCarthy, and he'd have to at least peel off one, or maybe more, depending how those 2 seats go, one or more from this group of 5 said they're not going to vote for McCarthy come hell or high water. What do you say about that? As a Democrat, I'm very upset about this. What do you say?
Well, number one, as a Republican, I'm hoping, and as an American, I'm hoping that the Republicans get their act together and they coalesce behind a candidate, and whether that candidate is, Kevin McCarthy, which I believe it should be, or someone else, it needs to happen. The reason being is this, and I think the understanding is, the common understanding is that those 2 seats are going to go Republican, so we're going to have 222 seats. That means there's only a 4-vote margin there. I know there are 2 strict, hard no's, Gates from Florida and Diggs, who I believe is the Freedom Caucus former chairman, that challenged McCarthy. And I think received 31 to 35 votes. Excuse my sniffling for a moment. For some reason, I started sneezing. The issue here is I do think that those other 3 that we're talking about have not said, have drawn lines in the sand. There's still negotiations going on to, as I understand, decentralize the Speaker's office. They want to be able to have debate on bills at the committee level and at the House floor level before they actually get voted upon. That's I think everyone can understand that and probably, share in that. Maybe read the bill, discuss the bill before we vote the bill. We've seen how Obamacare and the infrastructure bill have done such wonders for us here in those last matters. But I think what we're going to see is I think McCarthy has yet to pull out his guns yet to try and move forward. I think he knows what the proper time is to secure those votes. I think there are some understandings here. Were the national elections disappointing? Absolutely, without a doubt. The results were disappointing. We should have had a larger majority in the House, and we should have taken back the Senate. And there are a variety of reasons why that occurred. Number 2, it's important that we don't go into a shared government stage, or that on the first opportunity after 6 or 8 years that the Democrats have controlled Congress, that Republicans don't look dysfunctional and can't get their act together. If we have all taken an oath of office to be members of Congress, and we were all elected as Republicans in our states and our districts, they were elected for the purposes of enacting an agenda that's an America first, pro-taxpayer, pro-business, pro-economic growth agenda that protects this United States and reverses the progressive policies of Biden and the previous Congress. We need to go to that business, and we have to put aside political gamesmanship, because that's the issue. If Congressman McCarthy has to broaden his net and bring more voices into his leadership area, then that's what it should be done. That's what it should be. Or someone else is going to stand up and do that. Maybe Scalise, who's in line to become the second in the House of Representatives. Who knows what it may be? The most important part is that whoever takes hold of that gavel on January 3rd needs to be elected by the Republican majority. It needs to be a Republican speaker, and we have to start from day one, to reverse the ill-fated, failed progressive policies of the one-party rule that's dominated the last 2 years in Washington under Joe Biden and the Democrats.
Absolutely. Listen, you can either show you're grown-ups and you're responsible and you deserve to have a mandate that you can govern effectively in the interest of the people, or you're going to look like you have a clown car going on and you can't govern, which is an undercut your ability to be successful in holding on to the control of the House in 2024 and elect a Republican Senate and elected a Republican president in 2024. The ramifications of looking like a clown car in this fight for the speakership coming out of an extreme right group of 5 people is very, very dangerous for the future of the Republican Party, but more importantly, it's very dangerous for the future of the country. A good majority should be looking at having hearings, as you say, to try to shed light, the best disinfectant on the whole Biden family shakedown operation with all the deals that the Biden family did in the influence peddling. They can go back and they can look at the exposure of the non-enforcement of immigration laws by the Biden administration that have made the southern border an open sieve and has loaded us down with fentanyl, gang members, cartel members, criminals, terrorists, illegal aliens who come in and all of a sudden people want to have them vote. You're an illegal alien and you don't have to be a citizen and you can register to vote within 30 days of coming here. You don't think that's going to influence the turnout of an election? How do you have confidence in an election where it's being populated by illegal aliens who have no connection to this country, don't share the values, the culture, the language, don't understand what this country is about? I mean, this is dangerous stuff. You talk about an inflationary economy, calling into question all the taxes and spending that the Democrats are proposing, the regulatory state, that we've talked about earlier, which is regulating energy independence out of the picture, through the deep state. I mean, there's so much that has to be done. The ability to have hearings on all the things that we need to have hearings on: the growing threat from China, the Iran deal, Russia and their adventurism. We need to have effective government. The congressional hearing process through legislative investigation and oversight is very, very important. And if the Republicans don't get their act together and if they have this circular firing squad, this civil war in the party because somebody is a true believer and doesn't understand they have to get behind leadership and work, we're going to have a disaster in the House, and it's going to go down the line and affect 2024. What say you?
I agree. I think anybody that's sitting there and is concerned more about their own personal opinion as opposed to moving forward with a pro-taxpayer, America First agenda that reverses these social programs and policies that have failed Americans and have driven up inflation and put criminals on the streets and handcuffed cops and judges. They're not true to their oath. They're not true. They're true to their own personal self-interest. You know what? The Congress was established for a group of individuals representing the people to come together to reach a compromise and reach a consensus to move forward on an agenda. That's what the Republican caucus has to be, because, as you pointed out, Your Honor, we should be moving forward with a plan to fight inflation, to lower the costs of services on our middle class families. We should investigate properly the Biden business interests. Properly do that. Finally shine some light on it, as you pointed out. That's the best disinfectant for scandal. We should also, as Congressman McCarthy has said, let's bring the Secretary of
Homeland Security?
Security
Sure.
in to explain what's going on at the border officially. And you know what? There's no impeachment. Most people have been used to impeachment's always about presidents. It's not. Impeachment can also be used against Supreme Court justices or secretaries of this matter.
That's exactly
we
right.
have to have the proceedings. We need to have the proceedings and shine light on it. And of course, my issues that I think we've heard here in New York and Suffolk County and Long Island is that let's get rid of all these COVID-related mandates. Let's restore America back to freedom and liberties that we hold so dear, and let's focus on education. Education is a silver bullet for every American, every child in America. You know what? Let's give the parents the role that they should have, that they must have in a voice in the education of their children.
So therefore, one of the first things they should do is they should have a hearing about the Department of Justice attempting to intimidate parents from going to school board meetings and calling them domestic terrorists when all they're talking about is they don't want their kids indoctrinated with critical race theory or sexual orientation teaching at 3 years old. So how about a hearing on that? And if the Republicans don't get their act together, how are they going to do hearings on this stuff? It's absolutely correct. So Kevin's given me the signal. We'll take a break and we'll be back in a moment. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Stay tuned. More interesting topics coming up right up. Thank you.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report. We're back. Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. So, Jesse, guess what we have coming up on the new week? A U.S. Senate runoff election in Georgia. Now, why is this so important? Because if Herschel Walker, Republican, wins, you'll have a 50-50 Senate. The tie will be broken by the Vice President of the United States, Ms. Harris. If the Republicans lose that, you'll have a 51-49 Democratic body. Now, people say, what's the difference? You're not going to control it. The answer is, if you have a 50-50 Senate, you have to divide up responsibilities, and you really have a real role on the committee chairs and the running the hearings and the agenda. And if you don't, you have your voice in the wilderness. 49 is as bad as having 40 or having 30. What say you?
I agree. I think that 50-50 is what we need to be at. We should have taken the majority in the Senate in the cycle. It's been a disappointment. It was there for us to take. I think there are as we saw, there are a number of factors that led to that result, that disappointing result. But this is important because you want to force the Democrats to have every one of their votes, and we've talked about it. The senator from West Virginia, his name
Manchin.
Joe Manchin has, for the most part, kept this country from lurching to the left. We're not happy with his vote on the infrastructure bill.
The Inflation Reduction Act, which is, you want to talk about a consumer fraud, Jesse, that should be invested.
Exactly.
You call that Inflation Reduction?
It's Deficit Inflation Act. That's what it actually is, with all the pork that's in that bill that is not related to infrastructure. That's a disappointing vote. But, at 50-50, that means that the Schumer has to count on all 50 of his members. And hopefully that, the centrists in West Virginia and Sedona in Arizona will maintain that position and keep, these wild left-wing programs from going forward. So that's why it's important for us as a country and as a party to win the Herschel Walker runoff in Georgia. He did surprisingly well. I believe that a little bit more. I wish that him and the governor there were tracking the same, but it's good to see the governor, who won by 53%, almost 54% of the vote, come out for him there. It's important for us to have that 50-50. And more importantly, I think it's important for Republicans going into the 23 cycle and then the 24 cycle to demonstrate that we kind of bounce back in the Senate. We kind of bounce back nationally. After a disappointing national wave, there was a red trickle everywhere but in New York, ironically.
And Florida. You have to give them Florida, New York.
And Florida, that's right. Florida, New York, it's important for us as a Republican Party to win that seat. Number one, would be a huge check in the Senate, but also as a bounce back as we go into the 23 cycle, into 24 cycle, and have individuals. And what I like is that we have the diversity of interests and experiences in the Republican caucus. And we need that. We need that in our party. We've been doing that here in New York. I mean, Lee Zeldin demonstrated a coalition that he had of all different interests and approaches here in the state of New York, which is why he did so well and got more votes than any Republican governor in 50 years. So I think it's important. We need to stick to it. I'm hoping that, in a couple of days after this show airs, the polls will close. It is record turnout so far. I know that there's record turnout in early voting in Georgia this past holiday week. For Thanksgiving, I visited my mom down in Georgia, and even during the holiday weekend, we saw people going door to door and handing out pamphlets and making phone calls to all for these votes. So it's good to see, and here it is. It's going to come down to making sure rural Republicans, rural voters come out to offset an urban community like Atlanta.
I agree with that. Now, let me ask you the next question. Why is it, Jesse, that this country, this great country, with all the talent we have in business and in culture, in media, why can't we move on from Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and Hillary Clinton? And why does that matter? What do you say about that?
The reason being, I believe it's ratings and subscribers. I believe that the mainstream media is fixated on these individuals because they drive their viewership. No one can argue that the viewership of cable news network during the 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency were at a record high. That meant higher ratings, meant higher charging of advertisement, meant more profits for their corporate entities. Same thing for companies like those who own newspapers. But in the case of the newspapers, you also have those individuals, billionaires who own prestigious newspapers like the Washington Post, who only own it for the purposes of advancing their other businesses like Amazon. They champion democratic policies, yet they're Bezos is the one that's, thwarting the unionization of his warehouses. Our billionaires and the corporate structure have been purchasing these media outlets, prestigious media outlets alike, for the purposes of advancing their own business agenda. And that's the reason why they won't go away. They do not want to go away from Biden. They don't want to go away from Trump. They don't want to go away from Hillary Clinton. They don't want to go away from Bill Clinton because they drive ratings, they drive subscribers, they drive ad profits.
Yeah,
and they provide a venue to advance their corporate agenda.
Well, but the problem is, if you care about America's future, you want to have a deep backbench of real talented men and women. And I will tell you, as the House Democrat, I look at the backbench in the Democratic Party, I'm sorely disappointed. I look at the backbench in the Republican Party, and I see some real talent. So if you would care about the future of this country, you want real talented men and women running for office and holding office in the presidency. And I think it's a very big deal. And you touched on something which I want to develop with you. Elon Musk has bought Twitter, and he's been nothing attacked by that. And now you have Cook and Apple threatening to take away the app, which would totally destroy the ability of Twitter to function. So fundamentally, what you're talking about, you have the real makings of tyranny here, Jesse, because if you blow Twitter out, there's no countervailing voice against the left-wing big tech agenda. Cook's agenda is to do business with China, and he's an apologist for the Chinese regime. It's perfectly clear because he helped suppress the use of internet over in China during the recent demonstrations. He's always been an apologist for China. If you just go back and look at the tape, he's always said how wonderful they are and the progress they've made. the progress they've made has been at the expense of America. They've stolen our technology, our trade secrets. They have spies throughout this country. They're buying up land here in the United States. They're buying up land in Venezuela, all of which is strategically placed. They're backing the Ukrainian adventurism of Putin. They have a long-range plan to not just compete with the United States, but to dominate the world and subvert the United States. They control academia and different corporations. China is a real threat, and we need a countervailing voice. And Cook and Apple are not a countervailing voice. They're in the pocket of the Democratic machine, the Biden people, the apologists for that regime, and they're apologists for the Chinese regime. And if Twitter is shut down, where's a countervailing voice nationwide? You have the beginning of real censorship, total censorship, and that's the beginning of tyranny. What say you?
We warned. Republicans, conservatives warned Americans of the censure and the control of opinions and attacking the First Amendment when we had big tech, allowing the censorship of conservative voices on all social media programs, including Twitter. The most famous one being the New York Post story on the Hunter Biden laptop that was censored and suppressed. Democrats, such as yourself, have even warned of this. Now we're seeing it at another level. Here, it's not just Republican or conservative voices. It is middle of the road voices now by Twitter, the owner of Twitter, because he is allowing a platform for all voices in the First Amendment to be heard and to be seen. He is doing what needs to be done for his business model to be successful. And what happens, as you pointed out, an entity that is chained to the hip of China for its own profits, where it's God knows if they have child labor building their phones or whatnot. Allegedly, I don't know if that's the case. But here we have now a company trying to even, remove a voice of middle of the road or of an open platform for people to express themselves, except if it's hate and inciting violence and such. Of course, no one wants that. But it's amazing. Republicans and conservatives warned about it. Democrats, common sense Democrats like yourself warned about it. Now, it's not just conservative and Republican voices that are being silenced. It's not newspapers, media outlets that are telling the truth that are being silenced. Now it's an entire platform because they don't go forward with the narrative that this far left corporate interests want to have in place. They are trying to create a narrative and tell a story and drive this agenda of this country. And when you have a counter to that voice, an opinion, or want to engage in debate, they want to stifle it because their ideas
look what they did.
Useless.
Look what they did in the last presidential election. The true
Absolutely.
story of the Biden laptop was totally suppressed. The New York Post, the articles by Miranda Devine was suppressed. That if that story had gotten out, it may have changed the election, because this election was won by a handful of votes in only 3 or 4 states. It could have turned everything around if that story had gotten out. And now this fellow Roth, who was the censor-in-chief for Twitter in the previous regime, in the Dorsey regime, admitted that was probably a mistake and it was a wrong thing to do to suppress Miranda Devine's columns and exposés on the Hunter Biden laptop. And then what they did is, at the debate, if you recall, between Trump and Biden, he said, look, I have, 51 experts in foreign policy, and they say this is Russian disinformation. And the story is perfectly clear. It wasn't Russian disinformation. It was the real deal. It was Hunter Biden's laptop, and it showed a nexus between the deal-making and influence peddling of Hunter Biden and his uncle running around all over in China, in Russia, in the Ukraine, cutting deals, influence peddling off the name in the back of Joe Biden. It was a true story. They locked it down. They wrapped it up. And I'm telling you that it had to have an effect on people's votes if they knew about it. And that's why an open and free Twitter is absolutely essential. And you can't count on Cook to make sure that this country is protected in terms of its First Amendment rights. This coalition between the Biden administration and their bureaucracy and their political people and Cook and the other big tech people to suppress a countervailing voice is a very beginning and definition of tyranny. We have to take a break now. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Jesse Garcia, the co-chair of the Republican Party in the state of New York, as well as the county chair of Suffolk County Party. We'll be back in a moment to conclude with our final segment of the Long Island Report.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. So, Jesse, it's been an interesting conversation so far for the first three segments. Moving on, let's talk about the border crisis. It's only getting worse. The numbers of illegal immigrants coming in is increasing. They're unsupervised. It's catch and release. They're flowing into this country, into the heartland. They're being released all over with please come back piece of papers, and they never come back, and you don't know who they are. The number of terrorists and terrorist watchers getting through, numbers of cartel members and gang members, the fentanyl crisis escalating, the numbers are breaking. We could be losing, if this keeps going on with the fentanyl crisis, and this is a sieve because the open border policy of Biden and his people. The fentanyl is the product, the constituent elements are produced in China, and then are distributed by the cartels in Mexico. That's a joint venture. The Chinese Communist Party is not just doing this indirectly. This is part of a plot, a declaration of war against this country to subvert and destroy this country. What do you say about the border crisis, Jesse?
I think that, for the fiscal year of 2022, which ended in September, we had somewhere in the area of 2.76 million undocumented aliens cross the border, unchecked, unvetted. That topped the previous year record by more than 1 million. This is a national security issue. This is a danger to not just the border towns, but every town in America is a border town now, whether it be Chicago, New York, Georgia, anywhere, because as you pointed out, the cartel is flowing their gangs and flowing their drugs and flowing fentanyl into these unprotected, undefended southern border, and they're getting into our streets here in Suffolk County, New York City, throughout New York. So we're all a border town right now, and we're feeling the consequences of not securing these borders. Just recently I heard over the holiday weekend that amongst the last group of people across the border, 90 individuals that have been on a terrorist watch list or have been associated with cartels or were identified. That's just 90 that were captured and checked, not the masses that were there. This is a national security office problem.
So, Jesse, you were saying this is a national security issue. And let's not forget the human trafficking elements too, Jesse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we said, like I said, we're all a border town, and if we're all concerned about humanity and humanitarian causes, why are we turning a blind eye to the human trafficking that's going on? Indentured servants, people that are being used as mules, people that are being used for sex trafficking. At the very least, President Trump was the one who shined a light on that and took action against those type of atrocities. We're not. We're just opening the doors, letting people go in. We're turning a blind eye. We're sticking our head in the sand, and our kids are getting killed with drug dealers. We have people being prostituted against their will. We have human trafficking going on, and we don't care. We're allowing this to happen. We're knowingly allowing this to happen. And that's why our Congress and our House of Representatives need to get their act together. They need to conduct hearings. And if it reaches that level,
gas is out of control, food's out of control, prices of pharmaceuticals are out of control. And Biden keeps doing the same thing over and over again, which is the definition of insanity. Open up the pumps, start pumping the gas so that we can have a sustainable, independent energy economy. And it's about to get worse, Jesse, because we're on the cusp of having a national railroad strike. And let's see if the Democrats in the House and the Senate have the courage to do the right thing, which is to stop this strike. Because if they don't stop this strike, do you know what that can do to this country's economy? It can crash it. And what say you?
It's going to add to our supply chain problems. It's going to add to our inflation. It's going to drive up inflation because there's going to be less goods on the streets. Especially, it's coming at the most ill-advised time with the Christmas, Hanukkah holidays around the corner. This is not right. I mean, I thought Biden. I mean, Judge, didn't Biden take care of this like 2 months ago? Like he took care of the student debt. I thought these were all taken care of. I don't understand why all of a sudden the court said that student debt was not permitted, and that, oh my God, Congress needed to actually do it. Like,
and he knew. By the way, he knew that it was the biggest scam, biggest scam in the world, just to get the kids to vote for him.
Exactly, and we did see an increase of youth vote there because of that. And he took care of those rail contractors. Immediately, 4 of the unions rejected his plan. Now, Congress did finally act. I haven't seen the final part of it, but the congressional action taken by Pelosi is one where it doesn't even include some of the matters that were requested by the rail companies or requested by the unions. It's unbelievable here.
And the guy who has the whip hand on this is Bernie Sanders, because if he doesn't go along with it in the Senate, then you're going to need 60 votes. So Schumer is going to need Republican votes to shut down the strike.
Exactly. But I have not seen what the details of this. And then that's where the problem is. We have to see what the Senate's going to do, regardless of the action just taken late this week by the House of Representatives. Because I don't trust anything that Pelosi is going to do on her way out and whatnot. I'm sure that she is leaving a number of landmines for the Republican majority in 2023, as many as she can, this being one of them. But it's incredulous. Presidents are supposed to lead. The president said he took care of this 3 months ago. And now he's asking and directing Congress to save this process. This is all wrong. And I want to tell you who's a complete partner in this is the mainstream media, who seems to go along with it. Oh, yeah, okay, we never forgot. Biden never said that. Never said that at all. It's the hardworking men and women of this country, whether you're a rail union member or you're a consumer, that's getting railroaded by this administration and this Democratic majority.
I absolutely agree with that. Now, let's talk about the never-ending explosion of crime in America. What do we have to do to get this country back so it's a safe place where we can raise our children safely, get them educated, give them career opportunities, give them safe places to live, to let them live lives of optimism? How do you have that when you have a crime explosion where violent crime is up all across this country and there is no safe place, Jesse, whether it's in small town Americana, rural America, whether it's in the big cities, whether it's the East Coast or West Coast, the heartland in the Midwest, there are no safe places anymore. There's no law. There's no order. What are we going to do, Jesse?
Your Honor, I would imagine that the only way I could see is we go back to common sense lawmaking and, back the blue. How about we start by, letting people know that the environment where criminals can run free without consequence is over. How about that the government just do that by securing the protection and the security of its people, both abroad and domestically? Let's back the blue, right? Let's make sure the criminals know that if you commit a crime, a serious crime, you're going to spend time in jail. You're going to have to make bail. This is not a social issue. This is a black and white crime, not non-criminal issue. Let's take the handcuffs off cops. Let's back our cops. Let's give them the tools they need. Because you know what? When a cop leaves their house to begin their shift, it's not assured they're going to return back to their families or back to that home. We need to also allow judges to do what they were elected to do, to look at the law, use their judgment, be transparent, be fair, and execute their decisions on determining who's a flight risk and who is dangerous, and look at their history in crime. How about we just go back to common sense, criminal lawmaking? Let's just go back to that. Maybe the people will be happy about that as we go forward and feel safe, and maybe ride the subway, visit New York City and spend some money, go to our malls.
Well, Jesse, if you don't have law and order, you don't have civilization. And as Thomas Hobbes, the great writer hundreds of years ago, wrote The Leviathan, he said the first obligation of government is to protect its people. And without fulfilling that obligation to protect the people, they have no moral authority to govern. And that's the dilemma. And people are losing confidence in government to protect us. And everybody is a potential victim. There are no safe zones. Nobody is safe when you don't have a civilization that says law and order, public safety is the most important thing we can do. Jesse, we have to sign off this week. This has been the Long Island Report. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. It's been a pleasure being with our audience again. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll be back next week. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Your Honor.